St. Paul's police chief has some strong words about Saturday's mass shooting and what needs to happen next. He sat down for a conversation with Susan Elizabeth Littlefield.
It's a night that I have never experienced as a St. Paul police officer in my 32 plus years of service to the city, to have this many people injured by gunfire and one tragically, certainly the loss of life. It's unheard of. It's tragically historic, and something we're seeing more and more of, people settling their disputes through gunfire. And it's another example, like I say, that yesterday's fist fights have tragically become today's gunfights, and that's what we're dealing with. One of the common denominators in people injured by gunfire in our city each and every year, the number continues to grow, is just that. People are settling their disputes, mostly over disrespect, by shooting at each other.
So we think about this gun violence and how it's increased. Is the answer here more police, fewer guns? What do you think?
So there are many answers, and it doesn't do it justice to talk about just one. There are many things that have to occur to help curb violence in our community, people who are illegally carrying guns and using those guns to settle their disputes. It needs appropriate level of follow-up investigative service from a police department. It involves making sure that we are engaging our community, getting to know our community members so that they're more likely to help us solve crimes. It involves police, prosecutors, and the bench to work together to make sure people are held to account that continue to be in and out of the criminal justice system committing the same crimes. And when it comes time to a person who is not legally allowed to carry a gun, who is carrying it again and pulls the trigger again and injures somebody or kills somebody, I think that's where we have to draw the line. There has to be more accountability for people who continue to do that and threaten the lives of our community members, our family, our friends. And that's what happened Saturday night. Saturday night was another example of people out in our city having a good time with one another. And many of the people who were injured by gunfire that night, most of the people injured by gunfire that night are people who were just there to have a great time. It could have been my daughter. It could have been someone's granddaughter. It could have been somebody's son or grandchild or cousin or friend or coworker out having a good time in the bar that night. And this is what happens. And we need to do better. All of us need to do better. Community, police, prosecutor, and the bench, to hold people unapologetically to account for the continued violence in our city. And when we do that, we'll have less people shooting guns in our city and less people being injured by a gunfire in our city.
And specifically on the point of police officers, is there a magic number with police? I mean, if there were more officers, would this possibly have not happened?
Well, to be clear, Saturday night's tragic event, even if we would have had 200 officers throughout our city on patrol that night, this event most likely would have happened anyway. I have continuously talked about my desire of an authorized strength department of 620 to maintain that number throughout the year. So it's not a question, to me, a political statement. This is, again, all about the victims and the people who lost their lives. I don't want to politicize this conversation, but I am on the record to say that I have 620 positions in the St. Paul Police Department for sworn officers. That means I have 620 slots where they're assigned to answer 911 calls, to investigate victims, to support victims. And when I'm allowed to keep 620 year-round, I can provide more safety to our community that they deserve. But when I'm operating in a deficit throughout much of the year, I'm not able to do that. And so I don't want to say I need a specific number of officers. My request has always been is to be provided the number of officers that we're telling our community that we have. Well, I have always been a proponent of prevention, intervention, and accountability working hand in hand. And much of the mayor's public safety, Community First Public Safety Initiative is, it's really needed in our community. And I think we get bogged down sometimes having an either or conversation. There truly has to be both. The prevention, the intervention, alternatives to police responses, all of those things, legitimate police chiefs across the country, we will support those things. But we also need to make sure that we can have enough officers to show up for the calls for service, have enough investigators to support victims of crime on a constant basis, out of respect for our community, out of respect for our victims, and out of respect for the women and men of the St. Paul Police Department who are currently exhausted, who continue to show up to more and more very complicated scenes, very complicated investigations, and chaotic circumstances. And we can't continue to live on overtime because our officers deserve a day off. And right now, I'm not allowed, with the current staffing levels that we have, to consistently get our officers the time off that they need. And when we have tired officers, that's when mistakes happen. And I have an obligation to make sure I continue to talk about that out of respect for our officers and in the interest of public safety throughout our city.
And one thing that keeps coming up is we keep hearing there's a gang problem, but we don't hear many officials acknowledge it. Is there a gang problem?
Well, there's always been a gang problem in St. Paul from the time I came on the job in 1989. There's a gang problem, but the gang issue evolves over the years. When I came on and started in 1989, we had more of the hierarchy, the organized groups of the Crips and the Bloods and Peace Stone Rangers and other organizations who had a hierarchy. They were organized, they ran it like a business, right? And so now today we have a lot of small groups of young people who are identifying themselves with a name, a clique, an organization, who really aren't running the traditional gang business. They are specifically out there, protecting their turf, and it's a disrespect one group to the other. They're settling that disrespect through gun violence, and that's really what has to stop, and that's how it's changed. They'll call themselves a name that reflects a gang, but it may be a group of 10 to 15 kids who live in a specific neighborhood of the city, but they're carrying guns. And that's the problem. We have more guns that are ending up in the hands of people who shouldn't be carrying the guns, and they have no reason and certainly no right to be doing that. They certainly don't know how to safely handle the gun. They shouldn't have the gun because they've been convicted of a felony crime in the past, but they continue to carry the guns, and which is why I talk frequently about making sure that our police officers and our prosecutors and the bench are working together unapologetically for those who continue to disregard the consequences or disregard their conditions of probation, who continue to grab a gun and settle their differences with gunfire. We have to unapologetically hold those people, not that many, but hold those people to account to make sure they can't victimize the next person or the next families. Because truly, when I think about this, after talking with the Wiley family early Sunday morning, it's, this is personal to us. And when we talk to the family members who are grieving, it's gut-wrenching, it's personal. And grief, we have to remember, just isn't a moment in time. Grief is lifelong. And if we can do our part to make sure families don't endure lifelong grief through holding people accountable, then I'm all for it.
And I know that had to have been such a heavy conversation too. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's always a personal conversation, but it's gut-wrenching. It tears you up. Having a daughter that's very close to the same age as the Wiley's daughter, Markeisha. It just hits you at your core. The young, vibrant future is so bright, and it's such a relatable feeling for all of us throughout our city. The significance of loss is deep, it's personal, and that's why we are so passionate within the St. Paul Police Department to make sure we do everything we possibly can to prevent this from happening in the future. And if we have to step on some toes and hurt some feelings while we do that, so be it.
A lot of our viewers have been able to basically stay in the suburbs. They're not even coming into the cities. They're working from home. You know, they kind of have this perception. And when people saw, oh, that's the X, I've been there. I've taken my kids there. I mean, for anyone out there watching who wants to go to the X, who's scared to come downtown, what do you want to say to them?
Yeah, that's a great point, and thanks for the opportunity to be able to talk about that. This is a safe city. I would have no reservations having my family, my daughter, my son, my grandchildren come to an event at the Axtell Energy Center. We are in good hands, and I got to tell you, the women and men of the St. Paul Police Department are entirely committed to keeping everyone safe in our city. We have not given up. The officers of this department have not given up. They're rolling up their sleeves. They're making sure they do their part in the criminal justice system to hold people accountable for the acts that they have committed. So please don't let this be an opportunity to say that St. Paul isn't safe. This tragic event could have happened anywhere. If the people who showed up at another location would have conducted the same actions that they did tragically that night, this could have been anywhere. St. Paul is a great place to come and visit. I want you to continue to do that.